that people are encouraged very early in the process to incorporate that into their lives on a regular basis, because it's not something, there's never going to be a point in time when you finish point X and you miraculously are granted an extra 4 hours in your day. That just, it doesn't happen. You're going to end up having to choose, then it'll be family, or it'll be dance recitals, or it'll be any number of other things that will be vying for that non-in-hospital time. It never goes away, it never frees up.
Those are all such great ideas that you guys have, and Michelle, I think very similar to the way you do. And so when Ton and I first met, and he told me he wanted to try and do a project with me and think about especially how to improve this learning interaction, we had a little bit of a discussion. And we said, well, let's look at this. Let's say that we construct this kind of a plot. And let's say that on one axis we look at comprehension. We put least comprehension here and most comprehension on the other side. Now there's different ways. I said, Ton, there's different ways that we have available to learn. And some are going to take not very much time, and some will take a lot more time. And we started putting things on this chart. And we said, well, where would reading go? And we said, well, reading can take a lot of time. But the problem is, and several of you have said, sometimes there's so much to read. We're victims of our own successive information explosion. How much someone actually comprehends and distills out of that reading can be very limited. So their comprehension cannot be that great. Now lecture, we thought, well, we should put lecture over here. Well, lecture can be a very defined amount of time, so it doesn't take as much time as reading. But then again, depending on how someone constructs that lecture and the way they teach it, there may not necessarily be a great deal of comprehension. Well, we talked about those adult learning principles, and we said, a lot of those are great, but many of them are predicated on having that good foundational background knowledge before you start working with the learner. But they certainly, in that environment, can lead to a lot more comprehension. So that's where we were. We said, how can we develop more comprehension? How can we develop, apply these adult learning principles and get people that foundational information they need, but then use that interactive time in the classroom for learning? And this cartoon reads, I forgot to make a backup copy of my brain, so everything I learned last semester was gone. That's really the truth, isn't it? They come to your clerkship for 6 or 8 weeks. They may be, spot on. They may ace that NBME shelf exam. And if you ran into them in the hall a few months later, how much did they actually remember about that interaction? And that begs the question about comprehension. Now, this spring, right after Ton and I started talking about these ideas, we had a great opportunity. And this entered in the next phase of what I'm going to call visual teaching. And hopefully some of you have heard about this man in this book, Dan Roam. Who's heard of Dan Roam? Anybody in this room? Wow, I'm surprised. Well, I had never heard of him either until he came and gave a grand rounds. I thought more people knew about him and I was just in a cocoon. Well, Dan Roam is an advocate of what he calls visual learning. And this is his latest book. He's written 3. Probably his most famous one is Back of a Napkin. That was his first one. But I'd say skip his first 2 and go straight to this one if you're interested in the topic, because it's a much more mature thesis on what he's talking about. Now, Dan talks about something. He says, clearly words, language, both spoken and written, he says, is probably the greatest technology that man has ever invented. And we started off saying all of us are very interested in technology. He said, words is that technology, the greatest technology of man. But even before there were words, people communicated and they taught each other and they learned. And the way that they did that was through images, through pictures. But through time, as the technology of words has increased, he said, you know what, we've forgotten about the importance of pictures. And what we need to do is get back to a time where we're combining words with pictures. So a lot of us, we teach just with words, either through the readings that we assign or the lectures that we give, either on our PowerPoint slides or spoken. And we can give them a lot of words, but at the end of the day, did they actually understand? Did they comprehend? Did they distill out the key message that you had? So what Roam advocates is combining the verbal with the visual. And he says adding the visual to the verbal makes a clear idea become crystal. Now, I can't go into depth in the time we have about exactly how he says he does this, But in my slides, you'll see an illustration of some of the concepts that he's talking about. And he's saying, think about what he calls a vivid grammar. He wants you to think about every time that you say a word, draw a picture. So convert your nouns into pictures. And he's developed a whole grammar where you can have your verbs have pictures, you can demonstrate time and quantity in very simple ways. I'm not an artist, but I can certainly feel confident in what he's saying in the way that you combine your words with pictures. So after I learned about this, a few months later, Tan walked into my office and he said, Dr. Nuthalapati, you got to watch this. It's exactly what we've been talking about. So we're going to take the next 7.5 minutes and we're going to watch this video together.